Good evening and welcome back to Evelina. In this episode, we discover the true nature of one of our favourite characters. Prepare to be shocked. Letter the 57th. Evelina to Miss Mervyn, Berry Hill, 14th July. My sweet Maria will be much surprised, and I am willing to flatter myself concerned, when instead of her friend she receives this letter. This cold, this inanimate letter, which will but ill express the feelings of the heart which indites it. When I wrote to you last Friday, I was in hourly expectation of seeing Mrs. Clinton, with whom I intended to have set out for Howard Grove. Mrs. Clinton came, but my plan was necessarily altered, for she brought me a letter, the sweetest that ever was penned, from the best and kindest friend that ever orphan was blessed with, requiring my immediate attendance at Berry Hill. I obeyed. And pardon me if I own I obeyed without reluctance, for after so long a separation, should I not else have been the most ungrateful of mortals? And yet, oh, Maria, though I wished to leave London, the gratification of my wish afforded me no happiness, and though I felt an impatience inexpressible to return hither, no words, no language can explain the heaviness of heart with which I made the journey. I believe you would hardly have known me. Indeed, I hardly knew myself. Perhaps, had I first seen you, in your kind and sympathizing bosom, I might have ventured to have reposed every secret of my soul. And then, but let me pursue my journal. Mrs. Clinton delivered Madame Duval a letter from Mr. Villars, which requested her leave for my return, and indeed it was very readily accorded. Yet, when she found by my willingness to quit town that Monsieur Dubois was really indifferent to me, she somewhat softened in my favour, and declared that, but for his punishing his folly in thinking of such a child, she would not have consented to my being again buried in the country. All the Brangtons called to take leave of me, but I will not write a word more about them. Indeed, I cannot, with any impatience, think of that family, to whose forwardness and impertinence is owing all the uneasiness I at this moment suffer. So great was the depression of my spirits upon the road, that it was with difficulty I could persuade the worthy Mrs. Clinton I was not ill. But alas, the situation of my mind was such as would have rendered any mere bodily pain, by comparison, even enviable. And yet, when we arrived at Berry Hill, when the chaise stopped at this place, how did my heart throb with joy! And when through the window I beheld the dearest, the most venerable of men, with uplifted hands, returning, as I doubt not, thanks for my safe arrival, good God, I thought it would have burst my bosom. I opened the chaise door myself. I flew, for my feet did not seem to touch the ground, into the parlour. He had risen to meet me, but the moment I appeared he sunk into his chair, uttering with a deep sigh, though his face beamed with delight, "My God, I thank thee." I sprang forward, and with a pleasure that bordered upon agony, I embraced his knees, I kissed his hands, I wept over them, but could not speak, while he, now raising his eyes in thankfulness towards heaven, now bowing down his reverend head and folding me in his arms, could scarce articulate the blessings with which his kind and benevolent heart overflowed. Oh, Miss Mervyn, to be loved by the best of men, should I not be happy? Should I have one wish save that of meriting his goodness? Yet think me not ungrateful. Indeed I am not, although the internal sadness of my mind unfits me at present for enjoying as I ought the bounties of Providence. I cannot journalize, cannot arrange my ideas into order. How little has situation to do with happiness! I had flattered myself that when restored to Berry Hill I should be restored to tranquillity, for otherwise have I found it. For never yet had tranquillity and Evelina so little intercourse. I blush for what I have written. Can you, Maria, forgive my gravity? But I restrain it so much and so painfully in the presence of Mr. Villars, that I know not how to deny myself the consolation of indulging in it to you. Adieu, my dear Miss Mervyn. Yet one thing I must add. Do not let the seriousness of this letter deceive you. Do not impute to a wrong cause the melancholy I confess, by supposing that the heart of your friend mourns a too great susceptibility. No, indeed. Believe me, it never was, never can be, more assuredly her own than at this moment. So witness in all truth your affectionate Evelina. You will make my excuses to the honoured Lady Howard and to your dear mother. Letter the 58th. Evelina in continuation. Berry Hill, 21st July. You accuse me of mystery and charge me with reserve. I cannot doubt but I must have merited the accusation. Yet to clear myself, you know not how painful will be the task. But I cannot resist your kind entreaties. Indeed, I do not wish to resist them, for your friendship and affection will soothe my chagrin. Had it arisen from any other cause, not a moment would I have deferred the communication you ask. But as it is, I would, were it possible, not only conceal it from all the world, but endeavour to disbelieve it myself. Yet since I must tell you, why trifle with your impatience? I know not how to come to the point. 20 times have I attempted it in vain, but I will force myself to proceed. Oh, Miss Mervyn, could you ever have believed that one who seemed formed as a pattern for his fellow creatures, as a model of perfection, one whose elegance surpassed all description, whose sweetness of manners disgraced all comparison, oh, Miss Mervyn, could you ever have believed that Lord Orville would have treated me with indignity? Never, never again will I trust to appearances. Never confide in my own weak judgment. Never believe that person to be good who seems to be amiable. What cruel maxims are we taught by a knowledge of the world? But while my own reflections absorb me, I forget you are still in suspense. I have just finished the last letter which I wrote to you from London, when the maid of the house brought me a note. It was given to her, she said, by a footman, who told her he would call the next day for an answer. This note, but let it speak for itself. To Miss Anville. With transport most charming of thy sex did I read the letter with which you yesterday morning favoured me. I am sorry the affair of the carriage should have given you any concern, but I am highly flattered by the anxiety you express so kindly. Believe me, my lovely girl, I am truly sensible of the honour of your good opinion, and feel myself deeply penetrated with love and gratitude. The correspondence you have so sweetly commenced I shall be proud of continuing, and I hope the strong sense I have of the favour you do me will prevent your withdrawing it. Assure yourself that I desire nothing more ardently than to pour forth my thanks at your feet, and to offer those vows which are so justly the tribute of your charms and accomplishments. In your next, I entreat you to acquaint me how long you shall remain in town. The servant whom I shall commission to call for an answer has orders to ride post with it to me. My impatience for his arrival will be very great, though inferior to that with which I burn to tell you in person how much I am, my sweet girl, your grateful admirer, Orville. What a letter! How was my proud heart swelled! Every line I have copied. What I wrote to him you know. Tell me then, my dear friend, do you think it merited such an answer, and that I have deservedly incurred the liberty he has taken? I meant nothing but a simple apology, which I thought as much due to my own character as to his. Yet by the construction he seems to have put upon it, should you not have imagined it contained the avowal of sentiments which might indeed have provoked his contempt? The moment the letter was delivered to me, I retired to my own room to read it, and so eager was my first perusal that, I am ashamed to own, it gave me no sensation but of delight. Unsuspicious of any impropriety from Lord Orville, I perceived not immediately the impertinence it implied. I only marked the expressions of his own regard. And I was so much surprised that I was unable for some time to compose myself or read it again. I could only walk up and down the room, repeating to myself, "Good God, is it possible? Am I, then, loved by Lord Orville?" But this dream was soon over, and I awoke to far different feelings. Upon a second reading I thought every word changed. It did not seem the same letter. I could not find one sentence that I could look at without blushing. My astonishment was extreme, and it was succeeded by the utmost indignation. If, as I am very ready to acknowledge, I erred in writing to Lord Orville, was it for him to punish the error? If he was offended, could he not have been silent? If he thought my letter ill-judged, should he not have pitied my ignorance, have considered my youth, and allowed for my inexperience? Oh, Maria, how have I been deceived in this man! Words have no power to tell the high opinion I had of him. To that was owing the unfortunate solicitude which prompted my writing, a solicitude I must for ever repent. Yet perhaps I have rather reason to rejoice than to grieve, since this affair has shown me his real disposition, and removed that partiality which, covering his every imperfection, left only his virtues and good qualities exposed to view. Had the deception continued much longer, had my mind received any additional prejudice in his favour, who knows whither my mistaken ideas might have led me? Indeed, I fear I was in greater danger than I apprehended, or can now think of without trembling. For oh, if this weak heart of mine had been penetrated with too deep an impression of his merit, my peace and happiness would have been lost for ever. I would fain encourage more cheerful thoughts, fain drive from my mind the melancholy that has taken possession of it, but I cannot succeed, for added to the humiliating feelings which so powerfully oppress me, I have yet another cause of concern. Alas, my dear Maria, I have broken the tranquillity of the best of men. I have never had the courage to show him this cruel letter. I could not bear so greatly to depreciate in his opinion one whom I had with infinite anxiety raised in it myself. Indeed, my first determination was to confine my chagrin totally to my own bosom, but your friendly inquiries have drawn it from me, and now I wish I had made no concealment from the beginning, since I know not how to account for a gravity which not all my endeavours can entirely hide or repress. My greatest apprehension is, lest he should imagine that my residence in London has given me a distaste to the country. Everybody I see takes notice of my being altered, and looking pale and ill. I should be very indifferent to all such observations, did I not perceive that they draw upon me the eyes of Mr. Villars, which glisten with affectionate concern. This morning, in speaking of my London expedition, he mentioned Lord Orville. I felt so much disturbed that I would instantly have changed the subject, but he would not allow me, and very unexpectedly he began his panegyric, extolling in strong terms his manly and honourable behaviour in regard to the Marybone adventure. My cheeks glowed with indignation every word he spoke. So lately as I had myself fancied him the noblest of his sex, now that I was so well convinced of my mistake, I could not bear to hear his undeserved praises uttered by one so really good, so unsuspecting, so pure of heart. What he thought of my silence and uneasiness I fear to know, but I hope he will mention the subject no more. I will not, however, with ungrateful indolence, give way to a sadness which I find infectious to him who merits the most cheerful exertion of my spirits. I am thankful that he has forborne to probe my wound, and I will endeavour to heal it by the consciousness that I have not deserved the indignity I have received. Yet I cannot but lament to find myself in a world so deceitful, where we must suspect what we see, distrust what we hear, and doubt even what we feel. Letter the 59th. Evelina in continuation. Berry Hill, 29th July. I must own myself somewhat distressed how to answer your raillery, yet believe me, my dear Maria, your suggestions are those of fancy, not of truth. I am unconscious of the weakness you suspect, yet to dispel your doubts, I will animate myself more than ever to conquer my chagrin and to recover my spirits. You wonder, you say, since my heart takes no part in this affair, why it should make me so unhappy. And can you, acquainted as you are with the high opinion I entertained of Lord Orville, can you wonder that so great a disappointment in his character should affect me? Indeed, had so strange a letter been sent to me from anybody, it could not have failed shocking me. How much more sensibly, then, must I feel such an affront, when received from the man in the world I had imagined least capable of giving it? You are glad I made no reply. Assure yourself, my dear friend, had this letter been the most respectful that could be written, the clandestine air given to it, by his proposal of sending his servant for my answer, instead of having it directed to his house, would effectually have prevented my writing. Indeed, I have an aversion the most sincere to all mysteries, all private actions. However foolishly and blameably in regard to this letter I have deviated from the open path, which from my earliest infancy I was taught to tread. He talks of my having commenced a correspondence with him. And could Lord Orville indeed believe I had such a design? Believe me so forward, so bold, so strangely ridiculous? I know not if his man called or not, but I rejoice that I quitted London before he came, and without leaving any message for him. What indeed could I have said? It would have been a condescension very unmerited to have taken any, the least notice of such a letter. Never shall I cease to wonder how he could write it. Oh, Maria, what could induce him so causelessly to wound and affront one who would sooner have died than willingly offended him? How mortifying a freedom of style, how cruel an implication conveyed by his thanks, and expressions of gratitude. Is it not astonishing that any man can appear so modest who is so vain? Every hour I regret the secrecy I have observed with my beloved Mr. Villars. I know not what bewitched me, but I felt at first a repugnance to publishing this affair that I could not surmount, and now I am ashamed of confessing that I have anything to confess. Yet I deserve to be punished for the false delicacy which occasioned my silence, since if Lord Orville himself was contented to forfeit his character, was it for me, almost at the expense of my own, to support it? Yet I believe I should be very easy, now the first shock is over, and now that I see the whole affair with the resentment it merits. Did not all my good friends in this neighbourhood, who think me extremely altered, tease me about my gravity, and torment Mr. Villars with observations upon my dejection and falling away? The subject is no sooner started than a deep gloom overspreads his venerable countenance, and he looks at me with a tenderness so melancholy that I know not how to endure the consciousness of exciting it. Mrs. Selwyn, a lady of large fortune who lives about 3 miles from Berry Hill, and who has always honoured me with very distinguishing marks of regard, is going in a short time to Bristol, and has proposed to Mr. Villars to take me with her for the recovery of my health. He seemed very much distressed whether to consent or refuse, but I, without any hesitation, warmly opposed the scheme, protesting my health could nowhere be better than in this pure air. He had the goodness to thank me for this readiness to stay with him, but he is all goodness. Oh, that it were in my power to be, indeed, what in the kindness of his heart he has called me, the comfort of his age and solace of his infirmities. Never do I wish to be again separated from him. If here I am grave, elsewhere I should be unhappy. In his presence, with a very little exertion, all the cheerfulness of my disposition seems ready to return. The benevolence of his countenance reanimates, the harmony of his temper composes, the purity of his character edifies me. I owe to him everything, and far from finding my debt of gratitude a weight, the first pride, the first pleasure of my life is the recollection of the obligations conferred upon me by a goodness so unequalled. Once, indeed, I thought there existed another, who, when time had wintered over his locks, would have shone forth among his fellow creatures with the same brightness of worth which dignifies my honoured Mr. Villars. Brightness how superior in value to that which results from mere quickness of parts, wit, or imagination. A brightness which, not contented with merely diffusing smiles and gaining admiration from the sallies of the spirits, reflects a real and glorious lustre upon all mankind. Oh, how great was my error! How ill did I judge! How cruelly have I been deceived! I will not go to Bristol, though Mrs. Selwyn is very urgent with me, but I desire not to see any more of the world. The few months I have already passed in it have sufficed to give me a disgust even to its name. I hope, too, I shall see Lord Orville no more. Accustomed from my first knowledge of him to regard him as a being superior to his race, his presence perhaps might banish my resentment, and I might forget his ill conduct. For, oh, Maria, I should not know how to see Lord Orville and to think of displeasure. As a sister, I loved him. I could have entrusted him with every thought of my heart, had he deigned to wish my confidence. So steady did I think his honour, so feminine his delicacy, and so amiable his nature. I have 1,000 times imagined that the whole study of his life and whole purport of his reflections tended solely to the good and happiness of others. But I will think of him no more. Adieu, my dear friend. Letter the 60th. Evelina in continuation. Berry Hill, 10th August. You complain of my silence, my dear Miss Mervyn, but what have I to write? Narrative does not offer, nor does a lively imagination supply the deficiency. I have, however, at present sufficient matter for a letter in relating a conversation I had yesterday with Mr. Villars. Our breakfast had been the most cheerful we have had since my return hither, and when it was over, he did not as usual retire to his study, but continued to converse with me while I worked. We might probably have passed all morning thus sociably, but for the entrance of a farmer who came to solicit advice concerning some domestic affairs. They withdrew together into the study. The moment I was alone, my spirits failed me. The exertion with which I had supported them had fatigued my mind. I flung away my work, and leaning my arms on the table, gave way to a train of disagreeable reflections, which, bursting from the restraint that had smothered them, filled me with unusual sadness. This was my situation, when, looking towards the door, which was open, I perceived Mr. Villars, who was earnestly regarding me. "Is Father Smith gone, sir?" cried I, hastily rising and snatching up my work. "Don't let me disturb you," said he gravely. "I will go again to my study." "Will you, sir? I was in hopes you were coming to sit here." "In hopes? And why, Evelina, should you hope it?" This question was so unexpected that I knew not how to answer it, but as I saw he was moving away, I followed and begged him to return. "No, my dear, no," said he with a forced smile. "I only interrupt your meditations." Again I knew not what to say, and while I hesitated he retired. My heart was with him, but I had not the courage to follow. The idea of an explanation, brought on in so serious a manner, frightened me. I recollected the inference you had drawn from my uneasiness, and I feared that he might make a similar interpretation. Solitary and thoughtful, I passed the rest of the morning in my own room. At dinner I again attempted to be cheerful, but Mr. Villars himself was grave, and I had not sufficient spirits to support a conversation merely by my own efforts. As soon as dinner was over, he took a book, and I walked to the window. I believe I remained near an hour in this situation. All my thoughts were directed to considering how I might dispel the doubts which I apprehended Mr. Villars had formed, without acknowledging a circumstance which I had suffered so much pain merely to conceal. But while I was thus planning for the future, I forgot the present, and so intent was I upon the subject which occupied me, that the strange appearance of my unusual inactivity and extreme thoughtfulness never occurred to me. But when at last I recollected myself, and turned round, I saw that Mr. Villars, who had parted with his book, was wholly engrossed in attending to me. I started from my reverie, and hardly knowing what I said, asked if he had been reading. He paused a moment, and then replied, "Yes, my child, a book that both afflicts and perplexes me." He means me, thought I, and therefore I made no answer. "What if we read it together?" continued he. "Will you assist me to clear its obscurity?" I knew not what to say, but I sighed involuntarily from the bottom of my heart. He rose, and approaching me, said with emotion, "My child, I can no longer be a silent witness of thy sorrow. Is not thy sorrow my sorrow? And ought I to be a stranger to the cause, when I so deeply sympathize in the effect?" "Cause, sir?" cried I, greatly alarmed. "What cause? I don't know. I can't tell.
Fear not," said he kindly, "to unbosom thyself to me, my dearest Evelina. Open to me thy whole heart. It can have no feeling for which I will not make allowance. Tell me, therefore, what is it that thus afflicts us both, and who knows but I may suggest some means of relief?"
"You are too good," cried I, greatly embarrassed. "But indeed I know not what you mean."
"I see," said he. "It is painful for you to speak. Suppose then I endeavour to save you by guessing."
"Impossible, impossible," cried I eagerly. "No one living could ever guess, ever suppose."
I stopped abruptly, for then I recollected I was acknowledging something was to be guessed. However, he noticed not my mistake. "At least let me try," answered he mildly. "Perhaps I may be a better diviner than you imagine. If I guess everything that is probable, surely I must approach near the real reason. Be honest then, my love, and speak without reserve. Does not the country, after so much gaiety, so much variety, does it not appear insipid and tiresome?"
"No, indeed. I love it more than ever, and more than ever do I wish that I never, never quitted it."
"Oh, my child, that I had not permitted the journey! My judgment always opposed it, but my resolution was not proof against persuasion."
"I blush indeed," cried I, "to recollect my earnestness, but I have been my own punisher."
"It is too late now," answered he, "to reflect upon this subject. Let us endeavour to avoid repentance for the time to come, and we shall not have erred without reaping some instruction." Then seating himself and making me sit by him, he continued, "I must now guess again. Perhaps you regret the loss of those friends you knew in town. Perhaps you miss their society, and fear you may see them no more. Perhaps Lord Orville—" I could not keep my seat, but rising hastily said,
"Dear sir, ask me nothing more, for I have nothing to own, nothing to say. My gravity has been merely accidental, and I can give no reason for it at all. Shall I fetch you another book, or will you have this again?"
For some minutes he was totally silent, and I pretended to employ myself in looking for a book. At last, with a deep sigh, "I see," said he, "I see but too plainly, that though Evelina is returned, I have lost my child."
"No, sir,
"No," cried I, inexpressibly shocked.
she is more yours than ever. Without you, the world would be a desert to her, and life a burden. Forgive her then, and, if you can, condescend to be once more the confidant of all her thoughts."
"How highly I value, how greatly I wish for her confidence," returned he. "She cannot but know. Yet to extort, to tear it from her, my justice, my affection both revolt at the idea. I am sorry that I was so earnest with you. Leave me, my dear, leave me and compose yourself. We shall meet again at tea."
"Do you then refuse to hear me?"
"No, but I abhor to compel you. I have long seen that your mind has been ill at ease, and mine has largely partaken of your concern. I forbore to question you, for I hoped that time and absence from whatever excited your uneasiness might best operate in silence. But alas, your affliction seems only to augment, your health declines, your look alters. Evelina, my aged heart bleeds to see the change, bleeds to behold the darling it had cherished, the prop it had reared for its support, when bowed down by years and infirmities, sinking itself under the pressure of internal grief, struggling to hide what it should seek to participate. But go, my dear, go to your own room, we both want composure, and we will talk of this matter some other time."
"Oh, sir," cried I, penetrated to the soul, "bid me not leave you. Think me not so lost to feeling, to gratitude."
"Not a word of that," interrupted he. "It pains me you should think upon that subject, pains me you should ever remember that you have not a natural, as a hereditary right to everything within my power. I meant not to affect you thus. I had hoped to soothe you, but my anxiety betrayed me to an urgency that has distressed you. Comfort yourself, my love, and doubt not but that time will stand your friend, and all will end well."
I burst into tears. With difficulty had I so long restrained them, for my heart, while it glowed with tenderness and gratitude, was oppressed with a sense of its own unworthiness. "You are all goodness," cried I in a voice scarce audible. "Little as I deserve, unable as I am to repay such kindness, yet my whole soul thanks you for it."
"My dearest child," cried he, "I cannot bear to see thy tears. For my sake dry them. Such a sight is too much for me. Think of that, Evelina, and take comfort, I charge thee."
"Say then," cried I, kneeling at his feet, "say then that you forgive me, that you pardon my reserve, that you will again suffer me to tell you my most secret thoughts, and rely upon my promise never more to forfeit your confidence. My father, my protector, my ever honoured and ever loved, my best and only friend, say you forgive your Evelina, and she will study better to deserve your goodness." He embraced me, he called me his sole joy, his only earthly hope, and the child of his bosom. He folded me to his heart, and while I wept from the fullness of mine, with words of sweetest kindness and consolation, he soothed and tranquillized me. Dear to my remembrance will ever be that moment, when, banishing the reserve I had so foolishly planned, and so painfully supported, I was restored to the confidence of the best of men. When at length we were again quietly and composedly seated by each other, and Mr. Villars waited for the explanation I had begged him to hear, I found myself extremely embarrassed how to introduce the subject which must lead to it. He saw my distress, and with a kind of benevolent pleasantry, asked me if I would let him guess any more. I assented in silence. "Shall I then go back to where I left off?" If it please, I believe so," I said, stammering.
"Well then, my love, I think I was speaking of the regret it was natural you should feel in quitting those from whom you would receive civility and kindness, with so little certainty of ever seeing them again, or being able to return their good offices. These are circumstances that afford but melancholy reflections to young minds, and the affectionate disposition of my Evelina, open to all social feelings, must be hurt more than usual by such considerations. You are silent, my dear. Shall I name those whom I think most worthy the regret I speak of? We shall then see if our opinions coincide." Still I said nothing, and he continued. "In your London journal, nobody appears in a more amiable, a more respectful light than Lord Orville, and perhaps—" "I know what you would say," cried I hastily. and I have long feared where your suspicions would fall. But indeed, sir, you are mistaken. I hate Lord Orville. He is the last man in the world in whose favour I should be prejudiced." I stopped, for Mr. Villars looked at me with such infinite surprise that my own warmth made me blush. "You hate Lord Orville?" repeated he. I could make no answer, but took from my pocket-book the letter, and giving it to him, "See, sir," said I, "how differently the same man can talk and write." He read it 3 times before he spoke, and then said, "I am all astonishment that I know not what I read. When had you this letter?" I told him. Again he read it, and after considering its contents some time, said, "I can form but one conjecture concerning this most extraordinary performance. He must certainly have been intoxicated when he wrote it." "Lord Orville intoxicated!" repeated I. "Once I thought him a stranger to all intemperance, but it is very possible, for I could believe anything now." "That a man who had behaved with so strict a regard to delicacy," continued Mr. Villars, "and who, as far as occasion had allowed, manifested sentiments the most honourable, should thus insolently, thus wantonly insult a modest young woman in his perfect senses, I cannot think possible. But, my dear, you should have enclosed this letter in an empty cover, and have returned it to him again. Such a resentment would at once have become your character, and have given him an opportunity in some measure of clearing his own. He could not well have read this letter the next morning without being sensible of the impropriety of having written it." "Oh, Maria, why not had I not this thought? I might then have received some apology. The mortification would then have been his, not mine. It is true he could not have reinstated himself so highly in my opinion as I had once ignorantly placed him, since the conviction of such intemperance would have levelled him with the rest of his imperfect race. Yet my humbled pride might have been consoled by his acknowledgments. But why should I allow myself to be humbled by a man who can suffer his reason to be thus abjectly debased, when I am exalted by one who knows no vice and scarcely a failing, but by hearsay? To think of his kindness and reflect upon his praises might animate and comfort me even in the midst of affliction." "Your indignation," said he, "is the result of virtue. You fancied Lord Orville was without fault. He had the appearance of infinite worthiness, and you suppose his character accorded with his appearance. Guileless yourself, how could you prepare against the duplicity of another? Your disappointment has but been proportioned to your expectations, and you have chiefly owed its severity to the innocence which hid its approach. I will bid these words ever dwell in my memory, and they shall cheer, comfort, and enliven me. This conversation, though extremely affecting to me at the time it passed, has relieved my mind of much anxiety. Concealment, my dear Maria, is the foe of tranquillity. However I may err in future, I will never be disingenuous in acknowledging my errors. To you and to Mr. Villars I vow an unremitting confidence. And yet, though I am more at ease, I am far from well. I have been some time writing this letter, but I hope I shall send you soon a more cheerful one. Adieu, my dearest friend. I entreat you not to acquaint even your dear mother with this affair. Lord Orville is a favourite with her, and why should I publish that he deserves not that honour?" We will finish there. Quite an emotional episode, I think. In some ways, a bit of filler, but in other ways, well, we've all been 17, and we've all been disappointed, have we not? Good night.